From the campus of Brigham Young University, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 3rd Congressional District Special Election Candidates Debate.
Good evening. I'm David Magleby, Professor of Political Science at Brigham Young University, and I'm pleased to be invited by the Utah Debate Commission to moderate this exchange. Jason Chaffetz resigned from Congress earlier this year, and so voters in Utah's 3rd Congressional District will select a new representative. That election will happen on November 7th in connection with other local government contests to be determined that day. We are live at the KBYU TV studio on the Brigham Young University campus in Provo. Tonight there are 3 candidates who have met the requirements for inclusion in this Utah Debate Commission event. They are Kathie Allen, the Democratic Party candidate, Jim Bennett, candidate of the United Utah Party, and Republican Party candidate John Curtis. Under the established format, each candidate received the opportunity of making a 1-minute opening statement, and prior to airtime, it was determined that Kathie Allen will speak first. Dr. Allen.
Thanks everyone for being here, and particularly I thank the Utah Debate Commission and BYU as hosts, and my fellow opponents here with whom I've sparred over these last several months and come to enjoy, and you, the audience, that you are here because you care about our country and our future. One of these people up here is not like the others. I'm a mom, a grandma, a family doctor. I understand that everyone needs health care, whether or not they are a Republican or Democrat or a fan of Mr. Bennett's. We are all felled by illness and accidents and need a caring advocate. Labels divide us. What matters is values, Utah values, compassion, community, cooperation, but above all, honesty. Doctors know how to listen. We know how to persuade and problem solve. It's what I do every day for patients, and it's what I'll do in Congress.
Mr. Bennett.
Thank you. I didn't realize I had so many fans. I appreciate that. My name is Jim Bennett. I'm grateful to be here. I am not the first politician in my family. That honor goes to it actually doesn't go to my father, who was a senator for 18 years, or my grandfather, who was a senator for 24 years. But it goes to my great-great-grandfather, a man by the name of Daniel H. Wells. He was the 3rd mayor of Salt Lake City, and before he came west, he was actually a practicing attorney in Illinois at the same time as Abraham Lincoln. And the story goes that he went up to Abraham Lincoln and said, "You, sir, are a dead man, for I swore to myself, if I ever met a man who was uglier than I was, I would shoot him on sight." To which Abraham Lincoln replied, "Shoot away, if I'm uglier than you, I don't want to live." And although I look like Daniel H. Wells, I'm running like Abraham Lincoln, who at the time was a 3rd-party candidate. He recognized the 2-party system of his day was broken, the 2-party system of our day is broken, and that's why the United Utah Party is an alternative to the people who've been left behind by the Republicans and the Democrats.
Mayor Curtis.
Good evening. I'm honored to stand before you as the Republican candidate for the 3rd Congressional District. First, I'd like to express my appreciation to these opponents. Dr. Allen, you know that I have tremendous respect for you as a primary care physician in your career. And Mr. Bennett, you know how much we love your father and how much respect we have for him and his great service. And to all of you, welcome to Provo. I'm honored to have you here in the city where it's been my chance and opportunity to serve for mayor for the last 8 years. Welcome to the city that was just named the 2nd best managed city in the entire United States. Welcome to the city where 84% of our residents say they get a good to excellent value for their tax dollar. And welcome to the city where I came 20 years ago in pursuit of my entrepreneurial dream. With my partners, we took a young, scrappy company and built it into an international success. I hope tonight to show you that I'm not only right on the issues, but that I'm a leader, a problem solver, somebody that gets things done. I've done it in my business, we did it here in the city, and I hope to be able to do it in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for minding the time. That'll help us tonight as we move through, hopefully, as many questions as possible. The Utah Debate Commission has established a format that allows each candidate 60 seconds for an initial response to a question, and each will also have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. it is at my option that, as moderator, to pose follow-up questions. Questions for this debate were submitted by students at Brigham Young and Utah Valley Universities and from the general public. A question now from Nathan Roundy, a student at Utah Valley University. Nathan?
According to a recent New York Times article, political polarization has reached its highest point in decades, which has caused discord in Congress specifically and American culture broadly. If you are elected to office, what will you do to cultivate unity in Washington and within our district?
The answer in this case goes first to John Curtis.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm proud of my record as mayor. Mayors get the unique opportunity to serve in a nonpartisan role. And over the last 8 years in Provo, we've shown how people can come together with very diverse opinions, with different ideas, and come together. And as we meet together and talk about each other's positions, inevitably we find better answers. If I'm fortunate enough to go to Congress, I promise to take that same methodology of working together with other people with different opinions, with different views and different backgrounds, and coming together to find the best solutions. It's no secret that that's what our constituents want us to do. Just like your question, wherever I go in the district, people are asking me, how are we going to go back there and make things happen? And the answer is we send somebody back there who's actually done it. Thank you.
The next response is Kathie Allen.
I recently visited Carbon County and talked to the Coal Miners Union, and I had a conversation with a coal miner, and he said to me, my father was a coal miner, my grandfather was a coal miner, and I'm a coal miner. And I understood, because I listened to him, both his words and his body language, that coal mining was more than a job to him. It was a way of life, it was in his DNA, it's a culture. I told him it must be very hard to watch an entire industry die, and he teared up, and I knew that he had understood me. As a family doctor, listening and analyzing are second nature to me. About the bipartisanship, we need to listen twice as much as we talk. I will join the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a group designed in Congress of bipartisan members to get past this blockade. Thank you.
Mr. Bennett.
You know, I watched with interest the Republican primary where John Curtis prevailed, and there was an attack ad against one of his opponents. And it showed his picture on the face of a tombstone. And it said, if you send Tanner Ainge back to Washington, he says he'll actually talk to the Democrats. Then a bunch of bats flew out from behind the tombstone just to punctuate the point. The fact of the matter is, if you send a Republican or a Democrat back to Washington, D.C., you're sending one more drop in the bucket of Washington's dysfunction. They're not willing to talk to each other. There's tremendous political risk for them to talk to each other. I have the opportunity to be an honest broker between both sides. There is no political risk to come talk to me. And as the only non-Republican or non-Democrat in Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, I will be able to give the 3rd District a national platform to actually address these problems in a way that's divorced from the two major parties and their dysfunction. And that's one of the reasons why the United Utah Party is the best choice in this race. Now for rebuttal, Mr. Curtis.
You know, I think sometimes it's easy to look at these big issues like health care and see the divisiveness. But it shouldn't be lost on us that this Congress this year, which takes so much grief for not getting things done, has actually passed 337 bills, most of those on a very bipartisan vote. It's not everything that's dysfunctional. We can do better, and we must do better on these divisive issues. But there are many good people back in Washington, D.C., and in many cases, the system is working.
I'm going to ask a quick follow-up. It's a little bit different for the three of you. For you, Mr. Curtis, the question is, if elected, do you intend to support Congressman Ryan for re-election as Speaker of the House should the Republicans retain the majority? For you, Ms. Allen, the same question, but with regards to Nancy Pelosi. And for you, Mr. Bennett, which of the two parties will you caucus with for purposes of committee service in Congress? Mayor Curtis.
Yes, the question's difficult because, first of all, we don't know if Speaker Ryan will even be running for Speaker. But I can tell you this, as I make that decision, I will have the interest of the 3rd District in mind. And no matter who runs, I will pick the candidate that can best serve the residents of the 3rd District.
Ms. Allen.
I actually had the opportunity to ask Nancy Pelosi a question live when I attended a conference, and this was at the time that they were debating the ACA. And I asked her if she would preserve the doctor-patient relationship in whatever the final form of the ACA was. She failed me there, so I have some questions about her. I'd like to actually see somebody younger step up and take that role.
Mr. Bennett.
So far nobody's told you who they're going to vote for to be Speaker of the House. And I'm going to follow in that tradition because people have asked me that question throughout the campaign, and I genuinely haven't decided because I'm only going to caucus with who it is going to be in the best interest of the 3rd District for me to caucus with. I don't want either party to think that my vote is a gimme. And when you're a Republican, the Republicans think your vote is a gimme, and when you're a Democrat, the Democrats think your vote is a gimme. And I'm going to be truly independent and representing the 3rd District.
Thank you all for those responses. We'll go now next to our second question, and it's from Emily Bergen, a Utah Valley University student. Emily.
Considering the recent events in Las Vegas, how far are you willing to go in restricting gun laws while also honoring our Second Amendment rights?
This one goes first to Dr. Allen.
Well, I suspect I'm probably the only person standing up here who's actually watched somebody die of a gunshot wound. And every time there's a mass shooting, that brings that memory back to me. Now, I don't want to confiscate people's hunting rifles or weapons of personal protection, but I, like most Americans, favor sensible measures, and they include universal background checks. They include bans on bump stocks so that you cannot convert a semi-automatic weapon into a fully automatic weapon, which has no role in civilian life. I support biometric gun locks, which are new technology that when you touch the gun, it recognizes your fingerprint and is unlocked only for the owner. And I support storing ammunition and guns in locked safes separately from one another.
Mr. Bennett.
I strongly support the Second Amendment. And everybody who supports the Second Amendment also supports a ban on fully automatic weapons. Fully automatic weapons have been banned in the United States since the Firearms Act of 1934. And what you saw in Las Vegas was new technology that was able to transform a semi-automatic weapon into a fully automatic weapon. And consistent with the principles of the Firearms Act that's been in effect for over 82 years, I would support a ban on bump stocks as well. I think that's entirely appropriate. Right after the Las Vegas massacre, I took to social media and I said, I want to hear real suggestions as to what we ought to do when this kind of thing happens. Because whenever it happens, you can go to your Facebook feed and you know exactly what your Democratic friends are going to say and you know exactly what your Republican friends are going to say. And it gets so tiresome because nobody's talking to each other. It's time that we actually sat down and looked through ideas that can actually work towards helping us to prevent these kinds of massacres from ever happening again.
Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, Emily. That's a great question. Most people know that I'm a concealed permit carry holder, that I own firearms, that for a large percentage of my life, I've trained people on the proper use of firearms and using them safely. And I, like all of you, am saddened at what happened in Las Vegas. I think it hits home more for us because many of us have stayed in that hotel. Many of us have walked in that block. And it's incumbent on us to ask some very hard questions. Clearly, there are things for those who love the Second Amendment and who support the Second Amendment to talk about. Anything that takes a legal weapon and makes it otherwise illegal should be dealt with quickly as possible. We need to talk about guns being safe in homes and around young children. We need to have a lot of discussion about those who have mental limitations and perhaps shouldn't have firearms. But unless we look deeper, we won't solve the problem. People that have a desire to kill other people are a much bigger problem than just firearms. Yes, I want to deal with firearms, but I want to go much deeper. Where is this anger and hate coming from? What can we do to find out early, see early warning signs when these things are coming up in our community? What do we need to do to make sure our first responders are prepared and qualified to deal with these things? All of those are important questions, and I look forward to a dialogue on all of them.
Rebuttal, we'll start with Ms. Allen. I need to remind you all about the time we went over in the last case, so please keep it as short as possible.
I don't have any rebuttal statement in particular except to say that this debate has to happen, and we can't keep delaying it. It's what the public wants, Even the NRA has opened the possibility of supporting a ban on the bump stocks. That's certainly a starting point, but we have a gun culture, and we have to find some ways to make our country safe with respect to the idea that sometimes you cannot prevent these disasters no matter what you do, and that's the saddest thing of all.
Mr. Bennett.
Well, I don't have any rebuttal to anything specific that's been said, only that it took Mayor Curtis quite some time to say what he said. Right after the massacre, Kathie Allen took to social media, I took to social media, and we had all kinds of people who were coming out and saying these bump stocks are a problem. And there was complete silence from the Curtis campaign. He says he issued a press release, which I obviously didn't see, but the fact of the matter is we need leadership on this issue, and we can't remain silent when there are serious problems with regard to our gun culture.
Mayor Curtis.
Yes, we have added Mr. Bennett to our press release list in the Curtis campaign. And
thank you.
We will make sure that he's informed of all of our decisions. Let me just show you the complexity of this issue. If we're not careful, we move forward with things that just feel good. And if we rush to judgment in banning bump stocks, which I believe that we should do, but we don't realize that a bump stock can actually be printed on a 3D printer. That's why this is not a simple thing. We've got to go deeper on this and make sure that we are truly making our society more safe and not just doing things that feel good.
We're going to go to the next question now. It's from Andrew Sandstrom, BYU student. Andrew.
Do you believe that health care is a right or a privilege? And if elected to Congress, if you were called to vote on a health care bill, what specific provisions would need to be in that bill for it to earn your vote?
This one starts with Mr. Bennett.
Well, the right or privilege question, I think, is a false dichotomy. I think we've decided in this country that we don't allow people to die in the streets for lack of health care because they can always go into an emergency room, and that's an inefficient way to deliver health care. And so I would think that any kind of health care solution needs to recognize that that when you are in a serious traumatic injury, you don't have the opportunity to act like an informed consumer. This is not an academic question in the Bennett household. In 2011, my daughter tumbled 300 yards down the side of Solitude Mountain and suffered a spinal cord injury. And when we showed up at the door of the emergency room, we were not in a position to be able to negotiate the lowest price or negotiate and figure out who was the best doctor. We just said, is there anybody here who can make sure that my daughter can walk again? And so that's the kind of approach we need to take to healthcare, is recognize that people are going to need healthcare. We need to figure out the most efficient way to be able to provide it for them.
Mayor Curtis.
Well, we need to admit that we now live in a time when we go to the doctor, we're more worried about the bill than we are the diagnosis. That's a bad place to be. How did we get here? Decades of mismanagement by the federal government. 7 years ago, the Democrats pushed through a bill with no support from the Republicans. And they said to us, we have to get it through in order to see what it is. 7 years, Republicans complained and said that we could do better. Finally, we had our moment in the sun. We control the House, we control the Senate, and we control the presidency. And what did we do? We took a partisan bill, we pushed it through, and we said we just have to get it through, and then we can figure out how this is going to work. The answer to your question is what will I support? I'll support legitimate bipartisan efforts to finally fix this, to lower health care costs. There is so much low-hanging fruit. Illnesses are not Republican and they're not Democratic. We've got to work together to solve this.
Dr. Allen.
I'm going to agree with Mayor Curtis on a couple of things. First of all, experience is important, and I have 30 years of experience in this field. And the second thing I'd like to agree with him on is, yes, cost is important in the healthcare market. But what he fails to realize is that the free market is never going to solve healthcare, because healthcare in this country has become about profit. And as long as profit is the motive, and we're paying large CEO salaries, and we're failing to address other crucial issues of the healthcare puzzle, such as access and quality, nothing is going to be solved. As far as whether it's a right, that's a divisive word, and I've used the term, I think everyone needs health care. I think people get that message. Mayor Curtis, you have experience in guns. I have experience in healing. I'll take that experience and help fix health care in Washington, D.C.
Now rebuttals. Mayor Curtis.
Dr. Allen, I respect your medical profession, and you have experience at being a doctor, but I have experience at being a patient. I want the free market forces at work when I go to shop. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want a safety net for everybody. That doesn't mean there isn't an important role to play. But I believe ultimately the way we lower costs, the way that we increase competition, is by returning back to free market forces. I'll take my bet with the free market over a government-imposed program any day.
Mr. Bennett.
The idea of going shopping when your daughter has been injured and may never walk again if you don't get care right away is just stunning to me. The idea that that's even an opportunity. I think there are a number of ways to be able to lower costs. I think that market forces can help to do that, but they only go so far. And the idea that the Republicans, who have been saying for 7 years that they're going to fix health care, are now just waiting for the system to collapse and trying to figure out how to blame the Democrats for it. And the Democrats are sitting on the sidelines doing pretty much the same thing. Demonstrates to me that the two-party system has demonstrated it cannot solve this problem. And we're hearing the same tired rhetoric, and we're not hearing real solutions.
Dr. Allen.
Healthcare is not a commodity, and it's based on need. It's not based on desire. That's where the free market doesn't work in one respect. Another respect in which it doesn't work is that high-quality healthcare that focuses on prevention and early detection of disease and early interventions actually costs less. Mayor Curtis said the other day that his parents had received wonderful care. I can only imagine that was from Medicare, a government-run healthcare program.
I want to ask a follow-up question because a lot of debate about the Affordable Care Act, as Mayor Curtis indicated, and it's a specific follow-up. What is your opinion of these three things? Mandated coverage for pre-existing conditions, coverage for young adults up to age 26 being covered on their parents' plans, and no lifetime limits on coverage for chronic illness. Mr. Bennett first.
I support all three of those things wholeheartedly, because without those kinds of things, we go back to a broken system where instead of when you just leave it to market forces, people by law are covered in emergency rooms and those costs are passed on to everybody throughout the system. If we're going to provide health care for everybody, we have to provide it in the most efficient manner possible. The best way to do that is through a combination of catastrophic insurance and medical savings accounts. Catastrophic insurance would cover the kinds of disasters that people face, and medical savings accounts would allow market forces to lower costs.
Mayor Curtis.
Of course. I think all of us want those three things that you mentioned. I think the real question is, are they part of a safety net? Or are they mandated? Or how do we provide those? My observation is what's happened in the healthcare system lately is we've all moved from a safety net that protected some to a safety net that's protecting all of us. And what I mean by that is we're now in a position where people like myself, ready for retirement, can't afford or can't buy health insurance. And until we change that paradigm and drive costs down, we're all going to be dependent on this safety net.
Dr. Allen.
I support all of those, and I can only imagine looking out at the audience of the students what you must be feeling to have the mandate to cover kids up to 26 fail, because then not only do you have to face student debt issues, but then you have to face unaffordable insurance. We need a whole different thought pattern on health care. If we cover everyone in the same efficient manner that Medicare works with 1% administrative costs, then these problems will be on their way to being solved.
This next question comes from Cynthia Jones, a resident of Midway. What is your position on immigration, and what will you do to protect the immigrants living here in Utah, including the 10,500 DACA, or Dreamers, who live in Utah? They're working here and going to school here. And the initial answer this time goes to Mr. Curtis.
Thank you. I recently held a roundtable and invited people from all sides of this discussion. And at the end of the roundtable, the moderator looked at all of them and said, there's a potential member of Congress here. What would you like him to know about your opinion of what you would like to have happen? And let me just share a couple of those comments with you. Keep compassion alive. Remember people, not statistics. Help family. Invest in people. Principle, not party. Every one of those is in line with the Utah Compact, which I support. But the Utah Compact doesn't have a lot of specifics. It simply refers to the federal government to solve this problem. I believe there's 4 areas that we need to concentrate on. First of all, we need to find a system that allows people who are qualified and who can contribute to our country to come here and contribute, whether they want legalization, become citizens, or work. And I'm sorry, I'm out of time. If I'm given more opportunity, I'll finish. Thank you.
So the next response in this case goes to Ms. Allen.
Many of you in the audience have served LDS missions. You've had the opportunity to see that we are all striving in this world to progress as human beings. Immigrants built this country. In Utah, people fled here for sanctuary because they were persecuted. This is a Utah value, sanctuary and refuge. I don't want to build a wall. I don't want to send dreamers back. And I don't want their fate to be tied to a budget allocation. I do want to protect families from ICE raids. I do want to honor the LDS Compact. 95% of dreamers are in school or gainfully employed. Mexico would love to have them back. It should be harder to send them back, and legal immigration should be easier.
Mr. Bennett.
There is no more reprehensible element of the Trump agenda than their immigration policies. The idea of building a wall on the southern border, when in fact most illegal immigrants come here legally on temporary visas and then overstay those visas and don't go home. Instead, a wall becomes a xenophobic symbol that does nothing to solve the problem, costs a great deal of money, and represents the worst of who we are as Americans. And it represents the worst of who we are as Utahns. Utah was a state that was founded by refugees who were driven from their homes because of what they believed. And the Trump agenda is that we need to turn our backs on the people all across the world who are suffering that same fate today. That is not only a bad idea, that is an immoral idea. And anybody who would support the Trump agenda in this regard is not something that I would be able to support and something that I would oppose with everything that I have when I get back to Washington.
Mayor Curtis, this is the rebuttal, 30 seconds.
Okay. Your original question I'd like to go back to, and that was the question about the DACA.
Dreamers, yes.
The Dreamers and what we do. I don't know anybody that is in our district, that's in my neighborhood, that's in my world, that wants to just automatically send them back. But unless we implement a fully reorganized immigration structure, we won't solve this long term. And I believe it's incumbent on Congress to look at this in the large picture.
Ms. Allen.
Well, Mayor Curtis, of course, put up Facebook ads advocating that we build a wall and against sanctuary cities. And he then later claimed that this was not his real message, that it was the fault of an independent contractor. I can just tell you from the point of view of somebody who's been running in this race since February that I'm in charge of my message and he's in charge of his message, and that was a repugnant message.
Mr. Bennett.
To this day, I do not know, I've been in 5 debates with John Curtis now, I do not know whether or not he supports a border wall. He's called me divisive for bringing this up. But the fact of the matter is, when you get to the floor of the House of Representatives and they call for a vote as to whether or not you want to fund a wall, it's not a multiple choice question. You have to vote yay or nay. And to this day, I do not know if John Curtis would vote yay or nay for a border wall.
As we near the midpoint of our time tonight, you can tell there's fireworks here in Provo. I welcome you once again to this debate with candidates for Utah's 3rd congressional district seat in Congress. On November 7th, voters in the district will select a new representative in a special election to replace Jason Chaffetz, who resigned earlier this year. Participating tonight are Republican John Curtis, Democrat Kathie Allen, and United Utah Party candidate Jim Bennett. You are joining us live from the KBYU TV studios on the Brigham Young University campus in Provo. Now back to questions. And our next question comes from Cougar Enfelt, Utah Valley University.
With tensions rising between the United States and North Korea, what steps would you suggest be taken to de-escalate tensions between the two countries?
And the first answer in this case goes to Dr. Allen.
I think that I might start by taking Donald Trump's phone away. I think we absolutely have to respect a negotiation process with North Korea. all of the generals involved in this discussion have stated that there is no good military solution to this problem. In addition, experts who have to do with the inspections in Iran excuse me on that one. There is no good solution besides negotiation, and it's just tragic that our president keeps provoking somebody who's unstable and unpredictable in Korea. And I think it's frightening for all Americans. It's something that we lose sleep over.
The next response comes from Mr. Bennett.
I think it's frightening that there's somebody in North Korea that's provoking somebody who's unstable and unpredictable in the White House. North Korea is terrifying because President Trump is essentially using Twitter to declare war. To go on Twitter and call another leader of another nation Rocket Man, and to do everything they can to just sort of create some kind of reality show when you're dealing with a nation that has nuclear weapons. Now, these are not nuclear weapons that can reach the shores of the United States, but they can certainly reach across the border into South Korea. And if war were to break out in Korea, there would be millions of casualties on both sides. But you get the sense that Donald Trump feels like, well, there won't be any casualties in the United States, so maybe this doesn't matter. It's just stunning to me where we've gotten in terms of international diplomacy with a man who has not been able to demonstrate the kind of integrity and the kind of dignity that is necessary from the chief executive of the country.
Mayor Curtis.
To understand the problem and the solution, we have to take a deep look at North Korea and at Kim and the way he handles situations. We've worked with diplomacy for a long time, and we're further behind than when we started. This is a man who will starve his own people. Therefore, sanctions don't have the same impact that they might have in another situation. This is a man who those around him believe he's actually deity. Therefore, it makes it much harder to use some of the other options that we might have. Critical in all of this is our relationship with China. We must work with China. China holds the keys to controlling this regime and helping us here. Beyond that, this unfortunately is a situation where we've got to look at new options that we haven't considered in the past. The sanctions have not worked. We're in a worse position than we were 10 years ago. Hopefully, China can be our ally and our partner in this to move us towards a better situation.
For rebuttal now, we turn to Ms. Allen, please.
It's a global problem, and I agree that China and the other players in the Southeast Asian region that need to step up and help with it, but it's also us that's provoking this response. It's America and our president who has got us to the brink of a nuclear war, and we need to own that. And our president needs to own that. And he needs to step back and let people who know more what they're doing in foreign policy take the lead.
Mr. Bennett.
The president needs to be able to coordinate even with members of his own cabinet who've taken issue with the kind of irresponsible things that he's been doing in social media. When people were talking about diplomatic approaches and some kind of measured response to North Korea, the president took to Twitter and said, only one thing will work, meaning military action. You have a president rattling his saber for war on social media. It's astonishing to me to believe that Republicans, I used to be a Republican, and the idea is, I was talking this morning to somebody who was not a Republican who said, I'm yearning for the days of George W. Bush. George W. Bush was somebody who, even if you disagreed with him, was a responsible chief executive, and Donald Trump is not a responsible chief executive.
Mayor Curtis.
I'm ready for the next question.
Okay, let's go to the next question. It's from Jeremy Tadros from Orem. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Utah has one of the highest teen suicide rates in the nation. Eliminating the Department of Education threatens the positions of many counselors who help students deal with depression. Should the Department of Education be eliminated, how would you secure the federal funds needed for school counselors and other federally funded mental health professionals if the DOE is eliminated?
And the first response here is Mr. Bennett.
I don't support eliminating the Department of Education. I actually have an educational background. I was the first principal of the first charter school in the state of Utah for 2 weeks until we found a real principal. But I've been working in education, and the federal government usually, when it gets involved in education, attaches strings to its support. And Utah is in a unique situation in that we have the youngest median age of any state in the nation. And so we require, I think, support from the federal government. And I would support additional funding from the federal government to supplement what's happening in Utah. But I think that funding needs to come to Utah with no strings attached. That Utahns are in a better position of determining how that money should be spent than the federal government is. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm going to push for when I get back to Washington.
Mr. Curtis.
I think we need to acknowledge that the term federal funding is a little bit incorrect. That's our money. We send it to the federal government. They keep part of it. They attach strings and send it back. I think the best answer, if we truly want to help Utahns, and particularly those most vulnerable and those who may be considering suicide, is to keep those dollars here to begin with. We have the best chance of helping them with state resources and state decisions. This is exactly the type of thing that can be handled better on a local level, rather than sending our dollars back there, losing some of them, and having them come back to us with strings.
Ms. Allen.
I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I think the Department of Education has a specific role to play, and that role is to assure that every kid gets the optimum opportunities to maximize their potential, but it has another role too, is to protect kids that are different, disabled, hurting, women with Title IX. I do not favor eliminating the Department of Education. I agree that state should have discretion and creativity in how to deal with education here, but they don't seem to be doing always a good job. And I think that we need to adhere to federal standards so that there is some commonality amongst all of the schools. But your specific question about losing funding for suicide prevention, I think goes to the heart. We need a federal government to protect people who are at risk.
For rebuttal, we'll go in the order Bennett, Curtis, and Allen. Mr. Bennett.
I don't have any rebuttal, and certainly in terms, I think everything that's been said here is worth commenting on. But the fact of the matter is, we need to be sensitive to the needs of the school of our children, of the people who are struggling with depression, who are struggling with all of these kinds of things. And I think that there are state opportunities to do that. I think there are federal opportunities to do that. But we can't turn a blind eye to our citizens who are in need, no matter what their age.
Mr. Curtis.
I'm ready for the next question.
Ms. Allen.
If the state really were doing a fabulous job, I don't think there would be a state initiative going around asking us to raise our own taxes for educational purposes. There are so many state initiatives going around suggesting that our population is not completely happy with what our state legislature is doing, and one of those is in education. Call out to all the teachers. So appreciate the jobs that you do for us, and I fear that you're not paid well or appreciated, and we need to fix that too.
The next question comes from Stephen Sylvester, a professor at Utah Valley University.
Hi. So I, like so many others in my age group, are riddled with debt and frankly can't live the American dream and buy a home. What is your position on tax reform, and how best should we approach tax reform to enable ordinary Americans the opportunity to live the American dream?
We'll go in order Curtis, Allen, Bennett. Mayor?
There's a lot to like in the current proposals for tax reform. I don't think anybody should feel like we're done putting that proposal together. But specifically to answer your question, the ability to double the taxpayer's standard deduction, the child tax credit, the simplification. Right now, Americans spend 8.9 billion hours in doing their taxes. Imagine the waste. So I'm hopeful to jump in and work on this tax reform package and make sure that it's right for our residents of the 3rd District. I'll be looking for equity, for fairness, and for simplicity.
The next response comes from Ms. Allen.
The Bipartisan Tax Policy Institute just weighed in on Trump's tax plan, which gives an 80% of the tax cuts that are proposed go to 1% of the wealthiest Americans. I bet you that there's not a whole lot of you out there that are going to benefit from this tax plan. It also has no specifics on how it would be paid for. I've run a small business, and I know the importance of a balanced budget. And we are paying 5% annually to pay just the interest on our national debt. That could mean money spent for you to get an education that is much less encumbered by debt. Wouldn't that be a much better priority? 25% of the people with the tax plan will get a raise in taxes in the middle class. This is the Trump agenda that John Curtis supports.
Mr. Bennett.
Trump agenda includes a tax hike in the lowest tax bracket from 10% to 12%. But the fact of the matter is this is an academic question, because I submit to you we're not going to see tax reform, just as we haven't seen health care reform, just as we haven't seen immigration reform, just as we haven't seen any accomplishment by the Republican Congress, which is on track to be the most unproductive Congress in 164 years. The fact that you have a White House and a Senate all under the control of a single party, and yet they're not able to pass any significant legislation of any value, demonstrates the fundamental dysfunction of the two-party system. So as I look at this and we can talk about the details of a system that's never going to be enacted into law because the president continues to undermine people from his own party and nobody's able to agree. If we're going to have significant tax simplification and tax reform, it's going to require bipartisan effort, and it's going to require somebody from the United Utah Party to go be an honest broker between both sides.
And now the next response is from Mr. Curtis.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Bennett, I'll remind you that the House has passed 337 bills. That is more than any first year in a presidency in the history of Congress. Now, they're not as all high profile, and I will grant you that we're struggling with some of the large issues, but it's unfair to wholly characterize this as totally inefficient. And as far as the comments of Dr. Allen, I've been waiting to see what the Democrats might say about this proposal. Predictably, they say it's a tax cut for the rich. I ask you, where? Look at the doubling in the standard deduction. Look at the increase for the child tax credit, and tell me where it's a tax cut for the rich.
And the next response is from Ms. Allen.
This isn't my opinion. This is an opinion of the Tax Policy Commission. It's an independent body. I just read it today. It's just released its report. 80% of this tax cut goes to the 1%, which is just another form of trickle-down economics that has never worked and never will work. Furthermore, it is unlikely to happen. I agree with Mr. Bennett there, because they didn't fix health care, and health care is 20% of the budget, and if you don't fix that first, you're not going to get tax reform.
Mr. Bennett.
I'm trying to think about how many dozens of times the House of Representatives repealed Obamacare completely during the Obama years. Those would count as legislation that passed the House, but none of it becomes law because we have a bicameral legislature. Things have to go through the Senate and they have to be signed by the president. So no matter how many bills the House can pile up and say, look at all the great things we've done, the fact is this party is not capable of coordinating congressionally with the other House in Congress and with the White House, so nothing gets done, and this is on track to be the most unproductive Congress in 164 years.
I'm going to exercise the prerogative and ask a follow-up, and I want you to become more specific. You don't have to worry about those other 434 representatives. You're in charge for the moment. What would you do on this question of tax reform? What taxes would you cut, and which deductions would you eliminate? We'll go in order. Curtis, Allen, Bennett.
Which taxes would I cut, and which deductions would I eliminate?
Right, to balance the equation.
The many deductions need to be done away with. There are some core deductions that we need to keep. The charitable deduction, the mortgage deduction. But beyond that, that's part of the simplification problem. Our brackets have been so high that over years we just keep adding in deductions for people to take, and they're unfair. And a lot of us get the feeling that only those with a good accountant get to take advantage of those. So in my mind, they should all go, which helps justify the lower corporate tax rate.
And just a quick follow-up, we'll add time for the others. Which taxes would you cut?
Well, I think it's very important, and by increasing the deduction from $12,000 to $24,000, the standard deduction for a family, you give those most in need the most critical break that they can have, as well as a child care tax credit, which is very, very important. And those are the two things that I would put into the program.
Ms. Allen.
I would like to see the earned income credit expanded. That is a way to reward families of working people who have low incomes. It could be extended to people who don't have children, and that's been proposed, and it's been an attractive solution in a bipartisan manner because it rewards the working poor. As far as the deductions and all of that, I do think that the tax code could stand some extreme simplification. I don't favor the extreme tax corporate cut that Mr. Trump is advocating for. I do favor, however, the idea of taking health care out of the hands of business. To me, that would give them an enormous tax cut. And if we were to do that, that would relieve business of the burden of covering health care for their employees, and I would like to see that change.
Mr. Bennett, which taxes cut? What would you do with deductions?
I would cut the corporate tax rate to make us internationally competitive. We have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, and if we were to cut it, we would actually see an increase in revenue as businesses were to return to the United States as they've been driven overseas by high corporate taxes. I will also cut the capital gains tax rate because people hold on to their capital gains when they get a lower tax. Historically, when you cut the capital gains rate, government revenue goes up, because people recognize that it's a better environment to be able to invest. And so that's a tax cut that I think would work. With regard to income taxes, I think the goal is simplification, lower and fewer rates and fewer deductions. I would hold on to the charitable deduction, I would hold on to the mortgage deduction, and I think everything else, we can look at what we did in 1986 and that they completely undid just a couple of years later. Tax reform needs to be made fair, needs to be made simple, and needs to be permanent, so that people can make plans going forward as to how they're going to function under the new tax system.
Thank you for those detailed responses to that follow-up. We're going to go to the next question now from John Geilman. He's a Brigham Young University student. John?
What are your thoughts on limiting the Antiquities Act that was used to designate Bears Ears? If elected to Congress, would you support the bill sponsored by Utah Congressman Rob Bishop that would make it so presidents could only designate national monuments of up to 640 acres without environmental review or state and local approval?
First response here is Dr. Allen.
Yes, I looked at Mr. Bishop's bill, and I tried to figure out what 640,000 acres was, and I came up with an area that's 5 by 10 miles. And of course, it has a lot of other restrictions, like not being near waters, etc. You have to understand that if Mr. Bishop's bill were in effect the last 50 years, we wouldn't have Bryce, we wouldn't have Zion, we wouldn't have Capitol Reef, we wouldn't have Escalante Grand Staircase National Monument, and of course, we wouldn't have Bears Ears. I am against that bill completely. I think it's just another attempt to limit our access to public lands. Mr. Bishop has another bill to sell off our public lands, just as Jason Chaffetz did, and I am strongly opposed to anything that sells off our public lands.
Mr. Bennett.
I think the Bishop bill is a great starting point for discussion. Certainly the Antiquities Act gives the executive branch far more power than I think the founders intended the executive branch to have. This should have been a legislative decision. And when my father was a senator, one of the bills he was proudest of was the Washington County Land Bill, which was a bipartisan bill that he worked with a Democrat in the House, with Jim Matheson. And they went down to Washington County and got all of the stakeholders involved and said, let's find a solution to the public land problems here. And it passed with a bipartisan vote. And he anticipated that would be the template for a Grand County land bill and an Emory County land bill and all of these bills that would actually settle these issues once and for all. And both parties have dropped the ball on that. That's a ball I want to pick up and run with when I get back to Congress.
Mayor Curtis.
The Antiquities Act has a major flaw, and that is it doesn't have a check and balance to it. In our form of government, all of the branches are subject to a check and a balance. When a president can unilaterally make a decision without it being checked by another branch of government, it has the potential for misuse. One of the things that Congressman Bishop's bill does is put that check and balance back in, and I support that.
Now we'll have rebuttal time, and we'll start with Ms. Allen.
Well, that's really not completely true, I don't believe. The Antiquities Act does have a check and balance, and in this case, it was not rendered unilaterally. It was rendered because the 5 tribes wanted this land in Bears Ears preserved. And the state didn't get it done, and the Public Lands Initiative failed, and it really was an emergency designation because that's what the tribes wanted.
Mr. Bennett.
Well, if you go down and talk to people who were affected when the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument was created, that happened over 20 years ago. You go and talk to them and the wounds are still fresh. People think that that was a process that absolutely stripped them of their rights and stripped them of any kind of input that would have made that designation more effective. So I think any kind of legislative check on what happens with the Antiquities Act is probably a good idea and something we need to talk about.
Mayor Curtis.
Yes, I'll just reaffirm the problems that are introduced when a branch of government can move unilaterally. We're seeing that now happen potentially with President Trump, who may change what was done by President Obama. And no doubt that will cause as much angst as it did when President Obama made the original designation. The best way to handle these things is through a proper process that gives adequate vetting with the checks and balance.
We're approaching the conclusion of this hour. We have time remaining for each candidate to present a 45-second closing statement. You've been so good, we're giving you 15 extra seconds. The order of the closing statements was determined beforehand, and Mr. Bennett will go first.
I have framed on my wall my father's final speech in the United States Senate. And he said, the Republicans are the party of free markets. They think whenever there's a problem, the free market should solve it. The Democrats are the party of government. They think that whenever there's a problem, the government should solve it. And they are both right. There are times when it's appropriate to use the government. There are times when it's appropriate to use the free markets. But the kind of polarization that we're now seeing has made a farce of that kind of principle. If you believe the Trump agenda is the road to a bright and prosperous future, you have a candidate in this race. If you believe the Democrats have all the answers, you have a candidate in this race. If you believe both parties have gone off their respective cliffs and that it's time for everyone in the center to have a voice, I'm your candidate in this race. I urge you to vote for Jim Bennett on November 7th.
Mayor Curtis.
Thank you. The question I'm asked most often on the campaign trail has never been asked in a debate, but I hear it over and over and over again. And the question is, why are you running? Why would you do this? And as I think about that, as I contemplate the answer is that I have 6 children. Last night, the Curtis family brought a new grandchild into our family. And I'm confident that their future is in jeopardy if we don't start making hard decisions and sending people to Congress that have experience to do hard things and accomplish things. I hope you'll look at my track record, both as a businessman and as the mayor of Provo. You'll see a record of accomplishment, of working with people with all sorts of different opinions. I thank you for this opportunity to be with you today and ask for your vote.
Thank you. Dr. Allen.
It really shouldn't be about whether it's big government or little government. It should be about whether it's good government. I imagine our children's future. Will they live in a world where it's a sign of weakness to show that we care about each other? That's Donald Trump's world of fear and division. John Curtis has embraced this agenda. And Mr. Bennett, I really like you, but parties of one get nothing done. My message has always been and will always be consistent. Truth and compassion count. I'm ready to heal our Congress. I'm Kathie Allen, and I ask for your vote.
The Utah Debate Commission thanks our candidates for their participation here tonight. This debate will be archived online at utahdebatecommission.org. Remember, November 7th is Election Day. You must be registered to vote by October 31st. Halloween will help you remember that. Check with your county clerk's election office about that process. Voting this year will be done mostly by mail and only a few locations where you can vote in person. Your county clerk can also help you understand how to cast your ballot. Voting is a right and a privilege. The person elected in this special off-year election will be voting on very important matters within days of the election. So please inform yourself and cast your ballot. I'm David Magleby. Good evening. Please join me in applauding the candidates.